I supported and we passed, the Republican Congress passed last summer, it would have a significant effect on the border and fixing the problems there. It would do many of the things that need to be done. But of course, my Democrat colleagues did not support that. The Biden administration doesn't support that. They want more of the same.
It's Congressman Darin LaHood, Republican from Peoria, yesterday. Had a conversation with him about the ongoing situation at the southern border and how it's impacting Illinois. Yeah, we're thousands of miles away from the southern U.S. border, but Illinois getting nearly 30,000 non-citizen migrants. The governor says that they're all asylum seekers, but apparently in the Biden administration, you can cross the border and declare asylum and then be given, like a 7 to 10 year stretch before you actually go to an asylum hearing. So clearly there's some big things that are of major concern, and we continue to see the influx of migrants, but also a patchwork of sorts of different municipalities across the states taking actions to work at curbing the influx of migrants or the overflow of migrants coming to their communities. And if you look at the work I do with thecentersquare.com, you can see the headline, Illinois limited in regulating migrant buses as blame for the crisis continues. And this, of course, is at thecentersquare.com. So Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday in an unrelated news conference during the Q&A, he was asked a whole series of questions, and a lot of them focused around migrants and how the state is working to address the situation. And we'll also hear from a McClean County Emergency Management Director and also more from Congressman Darin LaHood about all of this. But here's what the governor had to say.
Everything that's going on?
Well, let's remind everybody that it is the choice, the inhumane choice of the governor of Texas and his colleagues in Texas to send thousands of people across the nation and specifically to Chicago, many of them with sandals on their feet, with no coat when they arrive, who haven't been given a meal in quite some time, and they arrive here in need. Now, nobody thinks this is a good idea, especially in December, January, and February in Chicago, to take them out of an environment in which the weather is much warmer and put them in a freezing cold environment, especially as we saw the weather yesterday. So let's just all recognize that this is being foisted upon the city of Chicago. Nobody's asked for this. This is something that the governor of Texas is doing to other cities across the nation.
So the governor then went on to talk about how the state's stepping up to provide resources to communities that might get some of this overflow. Because while the governor says that this crisis is being foisted on cities like Chicago, you also got to look at what's being foisted onto the areas down at the border. The El Paso, El Paso Pass. You've got the what's the other one I'm thinking of? Why am I just on a complete blank on that? Maybe some of the chat can help me out. Eagle Pass. Thank you. It came eventually, right? But the Eagle Pass areas, those communities are small, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 size towns, and then they're getting inundated with upwards to 8 million people over the past 3 years. So, where's the foisting really happening, and where are the major resources needed in all of this? While Chicago and other cities are looking at asking the federal government for more money, you've got local cities looking to block migrants from coming to their towns. Chicago, they implemented some bus regulations saying that if a bus drops migrants off at an undisclosed location, they could possibly have their bus impounded and the bus company could be fined. Well, that action led to the bus companies then dropping off migrants in some of the suburban areas. And that has now led to areas across the state looking at passing resolutions saying that they're not going to accept such migrants. Now, I was provided an email through a Freedom of Information Act request from the McClean County Emergency Management Agency director here in Illinois. And after I got it confirmed via a FOIA request, I do want to take a look at this because this is some of the things that you got to consider on a county level, what's happening. In McClean County, the emergency management director, Kathy Beck, She said in a January 2nd email that they're working to make plans for if they were to receive a bus of migrants. She goes on to say that they've had no notice or have not been given any indication of how many people, if any, would choose to stay here instead of going to an intake center. And apparently there's some documents attached to this email that I was not provided. It must be planning documents or something. But she goes on to say the biggest one is identifying a place that could be used as a shelter if there are a handful of individuals that would choose to stay. There could be minimum requirements for such facilities, like having adequate sleeping area, restrooms, showers, and cooking space with at least a microwave. Each community must have additional code requirements. And then also reaching out, this is an email to local officials about looking for these places. You may need to ask your mayor or chairperson. We'd work with community agencies to provide supplies, including food, cots, and bedding, as well as social services. And then she says, I believe this will be a hot topic. So the request is you treat this as for your information only and not to share it with those who don't need to know. But ultimately, Kathy Beck is, saying that they're looking for some areas in McClean County, some rural areas that might be able to take in migrants if those migrants being dropped off by a bus choose to stay in that area instead of going to a processing facility in Chicago. Well, I connected with Beck yesterday briefly and asked her about this email and what the plans are moving forward. Here's some of what she had to say.
That's correct. Everybody's looking at it. What emergency management does is make plans. So we're following state guidelines, and if we are to get a bus, the best solution to get people the most help that they need is to direct that bus or those people up to the intake center in Chicago.
And she also said that they have not received any migrants at this point.
There's really not a whole lot of warning, if any warning, on whether a bus is going to come at some point or where or how, or whether it's a bus or a train or a plane.
But ultimately, it's about planning, she says. And you've got the emergency management director of McClean County also addressing that hot topic part of her email. Again, she says in her email that I believe this could be a hot topic, so request that you treat this as for your information only. And I asked her about that and what ultimately she's meaning by that statement.
It's catching a lot of people's attention, and people are making hard lines one way or the other on it. And coming from the emergency management perspective, our job is to help people the best we can. I'm not picking any side of the fence.
But McClean County is apparently poised to pass a resolution saying that they will not accept migrants or even tax dollars from the state in order to care for those migrants, saying that they have limited resources themselves. But what about all of these different, bus ordinances that are going into effect? Chicago doing theirs, they're remaining a sanctuary city. You've got other areas saying that they're going to regulate buses to a degree, but they're not a sanctuary city or a sanctuary county. So you've got this kind of patchwork of bus regulations and different things, but Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday saying that the state really can't do much to bring about some kind of uniform regulations for buses.
So as you know, the laws don't exist in the state of Illinois for us to do that today, right? We can't just impose some rules from the state level on every city, every county, every township. There are certain towns and cities that have the ability to do that and certain that don't. And so, we've been listening to the various mayors and other leaders of those local governments to find out what it is they'd like the state to do. And certainly as the legislature comes back into session over the next week, they're going to be considering, whatever the options are.
But it's not just buses. Planes also involved. If you recall, there was a plane that landed at O'Hare, I believe another plane that landed at Rockford, and buses being sent to Chicago from those plane loads of non-citizen migrants. And the governor says they're doing what they can there as well.
Well, you haven't seen any in the last few days, have you? And let's just say everything that we can do, we intend to do and are in the midst of doing. Oh, there's a lot. I mean, and again, I don't want to give away our strategies. We're trying to prevent those companies from leasing their planes to the state of Texas. You can't, in general, you can't tell a group of people or an aircraft that it can't come somewhere. On the other hand, there are lots of things that I think would be a significant deterrent, and they already are working.
So Governor J.B. Pritzker not willing to disclose the strategy in putting pressure on private airline companies that may charter flights from Texas to places like Chicago, but he says that whatever pressure they're having is working. So interesting to see that. He also, was just asked about the politics of all of this and pointing fingers back and forth with the blame. And again, you heard that earlier. He said it's all because of the Texas governor and, foisting this situation on cities like Chicago. And that seems to neglect the idea that the Biden administration is foisting the issue on Eagle Pass and El Paso and those areas across the southern border. But, I guess we can do a flow chart to really see how that's all coming through and who's responsible for that. But the governor, getting into the political conversations about all of this.
And again, this is a cheap political stunt perpetrated by a governor in Texas who is simply trying to score points for himself and his party. And one other thing, it's his party in Congress that is unwilling to come to the table to actually reach an agreement on comprehensive immigration reform and border security. And the president is at the table and Democrats are at the table. It's the Republicans who seem to be walking away. I hope that they will not. There is a chance over the next week that his party, the Republican governor of Texas' party, will do the right thing. But unfortunately, I'm pessimistic, haven't seen them do it as of yet, and think that this will be a good political maneuver in a presidential election year. It won't. People care about people. And the humanitarian crisis that the Texas governor and Republicans are causing is one that we intend to address.
And again, I guess the way he's characterizing that, saying it's a humanitarian crisis created by the Republicans. Republicans will say the opposite, that it's the Biden administration's open border policies that are creating this humanitarian crisis. We'll actually hear from Congressman Darin LaHood in just a moment, but one last word here from the governor.
We haven't seen those dollars yet, not nearly what we should. The federal government needs to do much more. I've said that publicly. I've put a letter, out there with specific ideas that I think they should undertake. Some of those they've done, others they have not. And again, I'm on the phone very regularly, and my administration is with the White House to try to encourage. But remember, Congress has to act. And we have at least one House of Congress that isn't under Democrats' control. And they seem to be absolutely opposed to making progress on this issue. So I'm concerned.
But what is that progress? Is that progress just more money? Is that progress more work permits? Is that progress, speeding up the asylum hearings? Or is that progress maybe more related to closing the border? I talked with Congressman Darin LaHood and asked him to react to Governor J.B. Pritzker, who said that it's Republicans in the U.S. House who don't want to, quote, make progress on this issue. Here's Darin LaHood.
Well, first of all, I would just say that's a complete lie, what he said. There's been an abject failure on behalf of the Biden administration when it comes to our southern border, really being overrun with illegal immigrants and creating a humanitarian crisis, not necessarily not on the border alone, but in cities like Chicago and New York and all across the country. It is, and this has in turn created a real security crisis for our country. It's an unmitigated disaster.
So I asked him what the first steps should be. Should there be, compromise on immigration reform to get to closing the border, or should the border be closed first and foremost?
Well, first of all, let's remember over the last 3 years, there's been 8 million illegal crossings nationwide. And so the chaos that's been unleashed by these Biden policies of not enforcing the rule of law. So I would say, number one, you have to enforce the rule of law. We are a country based on the premise that laws matter in a democratic system and a constitutional system like ours. Those are not currently being enforced. What has happened is you look at the fentanyl crisis that's been created, rising crime, the strain on our schools and community services across the nation. It's absolutely ridiculous. So what should happen, Greg, is go back to the policies we had under the Trump administration. What did they do? First of all, I'm not talking about building a wall. I'm talking about work with the Mexican government and say, we're not going to give you any more foreign aid, or we're not going to give you any more support unless you stop everybody on the Mexican side. If you want to apply for asylum, if you want to apply to become a citizen, if you want to get a green card, if you have some reason that you want, do that on the Mexican side. That happened. We had the lowest illegal crossings in the history of the country when that was put in place. That can be done now. You can enforce the rule of law right now and stop people from coming across. That's not being done. And again, it's an unmitigated disaster that's having grave consequences for the country. And this isn't just from Republicans. This is Democrats, it's independents, it's libertarians, all across this country.
And the congressman also talked about how Republicans have moved forward with some legislation in the U.S. House. I think he referenced House Resolution 2 that he said Republicans supported.
I supported, and we passed. The Republican Congress passed last summer. It would have a significant effect on the border and fixing the problems there. It would do many of the things that need to be done. But of course, my Democrat colleagues did not support that. The Biden administration doesn't support that. They want more of the same.
So here we are having to deal with the ramifications of all of this. And I think that we're going to hear a lot more heading into the rest of this year as the political ramifications, the consequences, will they lead to one outcome in November or the other outcome in November? And how is this in Chicago going to impact the Democratic National Convention, which is in August? And that's where they're going to select who is the Democrat nominee for president. You got the Republican conference in July, I believe. So there's a lot of politics that's going to be had in the very near future. Also, I think, you've got just the legislature coming back with the idea of more taxpayer funds, and Governor J.B. Pritzker indicating that indeed he's in conversations with political leaders at the State House and how they're going to possibly free up some more money to deal with all of this in Illinois. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out. Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Each and every weekday morning, we go live to break out everything you need to know here in Illinois when it comes to a variety of issues, from the Second Amendment to undocumented migrants to State House activity. So we'll be tracking all of that. Hopefully you can follow along and enjoy some coffee with me each and every morning, all right? Appreciate you guys tuning in.